A deck of playing cards is such a familiar object that most people never stop to question its design. The colorful faces, the numbered suits, and the smooth finish all seem perfectly ordinary. Yet one small detail has become so universal that it almost disappears from notice: the rounded corners. Whether the deck is used for poker, bridge, magic tricks, or family game night, nearly every modern playing card shares this same feature. It seems like a purely decorative choice, but the reason is surprisingly practical. Right here, on History of Simple Things. Early playing cards did not always have rounded corners. The first cards, which appeared centuries ago in China before spreading through the Middle East and eventually Europe, were often handmade. Craftsmen cut them with simple tools, leaving sharp square corners because they were easier and faster to produce. At first, this wasn't much of a problem since card games were relatively simple and decks were replaced frequently as they wore out. However, as playing cards became more popular and more people handled them regularly, a flaw in the design began to reveal itself. Those tiny pointed corners turned out to be surprisingly fragile. Every shuffle, every deal, and every slide across a table put pressure on the edges. Over time, the corners bent, split, or frayed much faster than the rest of the card. A deck that was otherwise perfectly usable could become unpleasant to handle simply because its corners had started to peel apart. The biggest issue with square corners was durability. Whenever cards rubbed against one another, the pointed edges acted like tiny hooks. Instead of gliding smoothly, they would catch on neighboring cards, making shuffling more difficult and causing the paper layers to separate. The repeated stress concentrated on those sharp tips because they were the weakest points of the entire card. Even storing the deck could cause damage. Cards placed tightly inside a box would press against one another, gradually crushing the corners. Once a corner became bent, it rarely returned to its original shape. That damaged edge would snag even more during future games, creating a cycle that quickly wore the card down. This wasn't merely an aesthetic issue. In serious card games, players could unintentionally recognize individual cards by their damaged corners. A slightly bent ace or a frayed king could become identifiable before it was even revealed, affecting the fairness of the game. Casinos and competitive players especially wanted decks that remained as uniform as possible for as long as possible. Manufacturers eventually realized that simply trimming away the fragile points dramatically improved a deck's lifespan. Removing those tiny tips distributed stress more evenly around the edge, instead of concentrating it at 4 vulnerable points. Rounded corners didn't just make cards last longer, they also made them much easier to use. Anyone who has shuffled cards knows that the edges constantly slide against one another. Smooth, curved corners naturally glide together with far less resistance than pointed ones. Whether performing a riffle shuffle, an overhand shuffle, or even spreading cards across a table, rounded corners reduce friction. Instead of catching and sticking together, the cards separate cleanly and move more predictably. This seemingly minor improvement makes an enormous difference after hundreds or even thousands of shuffles. Professional card players and magicians benefit even more from rounded corners. Card flourishes, fans, springs, and sleight-of-hand techniques all rely on cards moving consistently. Sharp corners would catch on fingers and neighboring cards, making many of these moves slower, noisier, and less reliable. Rounded corners allow performers to manipulate decks with remarkable precision. The widespread adoption of rounded corners became possible as industrial manufacturing improved during the 19th century. As factories began producing millions of identical playing cards, specialized cutting machines replaced much of the manual work. These machines could punch perfectly consistent rounded corners with incredible speed and accuracy. Once manufacturers discovered that rounded cards lasted longer and generated fewer customer complaints, the design quickly became the industry standard. It wasn't just about quality, it also made business sense. The success of rounded playing cards eventually influenced many other products. Credit cards, identification cards, hotel key cards, library cards, and countless plastic cards all feature rounded corners because they resist wear better and are more comfortable to carry and handle. Even business cards are sometimes printed with rounded edges to help them stay looking newer for longer. The same engineering principle extends beyond cards. Sharp corners concentrate stress, making materials more likely to crack, bend, or chip, while rounded edges spread that force more evenly. That is why similar curved designs can also be found in products ranging from airplane windows to smartphones. What began as a solution for playing cards eventually became a design standard used across many industries. Today, nearly every playing card manufacturer uses rounded corners because the design has consistently proven its value. It improves durability, makes shuffling and dealing smoother, and helps cards stay in good condition even after thousands of games. Whether the deck is used in a casino, at a family gathering, or by a professional magician, the same simple design continues to perform reliably. Even modern materials haven't made the design obsolete. Plastic-coated, waterproof, and premium casino decks all still rely on rounded corners because they reduce unnecessary wear while keeping every card easy to handle. It's a small improvement that has remained virtually unchanged for generations, proving that sometimes the simplest ideas are also the ones that stand the test of time. The rounded corners of playing cards are a perfect example of practical design triumphing over simplicity. What began as a solution to frayed edges and damaged decks evolved into a standard that improved durability, fairness, handling, and manufacturing all at once. A tiny curve at each corner transformed the way cards perform, proving that even the smallest design choices can have a lasting impact. Today, every shuffle and every deal carries a piece of that quiet innovation, reminding us that sometimes the smartest ideas are the ones we barely notice. Thank you for watching. If you have suggestions for our next video, feel free to share them in the comments below. We'll be sure to give you an acknowledgement for your contribution. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the history of simple things. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more stories woven through the smallest details.